I'm really
There
concerned.
we go. The Independent Plus. We've got a selection there of what exactly everybody is earning in their pensions. James, what are you just going to say you're concerned? What are you concerned about?
My main concern is I'm actually flying out to Portofino tomorrow. My biggest concern is I may not get there now, really, so I'm actually going to be part of this chaos.
We're supposed to be talking about people sharing the pain here, James. That's not really sounding terribly sympathetic, isn't it? As we're talking about pensions, the average health worker of £4,087. It is interesting the way they've laid it out in the Independent, though, isn't it? They've got the headline here, public sector pensions spot the odd one out, and this is the story here that MPs are going to have to pay an extra 3.2% of the salary.
People looking at that front page, they're going to be astounded. We have heard a lot in recent weeks of MPs being questioned about that, and they have said it does have to come in line, doesn't it? They're not shirking from it, they just haven't done anything about it yet.
No, and they are having to pay an extra 3.2% of their salaries into their pension, but the bottom line is it's still a much more attractive package than some of these other ones that you see, and we heard that David Cameron is calling the strikes irresponsible. And obviously people have their own opinion on that, but when you read some of those pensions, £4,087 for a health worker, you ain't going to be living off the fat of the land on that, are you?
No, but also I think look at the disparity between all these numbers. I mean, I think when you look at it like that, the gap between 4,000 and 20,000, and what basis do you do that? And I think I can understand, you know, the frustration and the anger amongst the people, you know, clearly who are striking, but I think the reality of the situation, the government's financial purse right now, you know, is really not in a great position. This country's got more debt than it's ever had in its history. We don't have the liquidity available. And at the end of the day, you know, we just saw on your headlines, look at what's happening in Greece. If governments do not tighten their belt, if they don't act responsibly, the country goes bust.
But there are two things there. I mean, one being who bears the brunt. I mean, if we are in this situation, who bears the brunt? And obviously a lot of people feel that, you know, it's the people lower down the pay scale who are bearing a disproportionate amount of this burden. And also it's still a matter of public debate as to whether, and of course the deficit is a concern, we should be cutting it as quickly and radically. And again, people will have their views. And that's part of the wider discussion about the strikes tomorrow, a feeling that, you know, growth is suffering. I'm talking to a man who knows more about these things than I do, but there are concerns. I saw a story today saying that we're now seeing crime in the London area growing because of people feeling the pinch. So, you know, there's not an absolute consensus that this is the right economic strategy. So the strikes are about more, I think, than just pensions.
Also about public support, I guess. We've heard a mix of responses, but very poignantly and pointedly, certainly as far as business people are concerned, is that their staff can't get to work because the teachers are striking, so they're closing schools, so parents have to stay at home. They're losing hours in a time when the economy can't afford to be losing those kind of man hours. Do you think even if there is sympathy tomorrow, if these strikes continue, that will just dissipate in the weeks and months ahead?
No, absolutely, because, you know, I think as Kate said, you've got the frustration where right now businesses themselves are struggling. You know, they're struggling to keep going and keep productivity levels higher. And if your people can't come to work, it just compounds the problem. Even if you look at BA, the problems that it's had, I mean, every day there's a strike, it has a huge effect on its revenues, on its income, etc. And on the one hand, we're saying that BA needs to be more responsible, but then, of course, if people keep striking, it just has a compact effect on the whole thing. But in a way, you can see both sides of the argument. You can see the numbers here clearly. If you're one of these people whose pension is being clearly affected, I get that. But also, I think from a government's perspective, we would be criticising government if they were irresponsible and not being sensible about what they can and can't afford. So you can see it from their point of view, but clearly I think tomorrow everybody's going to lose out.
OK, let's have a look at the Eye. They are leading on this as well. Strike chaos to hit schools and airports. OK, the issue for many people is that going forward, as you mentioned, you know, the wider economy, there are other issues at stake here. But where do these strikers expect the government to find the money? We've got one of the unions who haven't been on strike for 127 years. I think that's the Association of Teachers and Lecturers, so clearly feeling very passionate about this.
Known as radical people. They're not known as militant people, you know, traditionally very conservative with a small c. And it's interesting, you say, well, where are they going to find the money? And I'm not putting this out as an easy cliche, but maybe fat cats. I mean, I think what the coalition is trying to do is create some some kind of divide between people working in the public sector and people working in the private sector. And, saying, well, they're having to work harder in the private sector, they don't have the cushy pensions, etc., etc. But actually, all of these people are struggling. Most people are struggling, whether they're in the public or the private sector, most normal people. And, where do we get the money from? I think there is still a feeling that there are a lot of people in this country who are earning megabucks, megabucks, and evading taxes, etc., etc. And rather than trying to divide and rule between the ordinary folk, there's a sense of, the great divide between the super rich and the people who are just trying to pay the mortgage at the end of the month.
All right, The Guardian's also leading on this story. Their headline, unions throw down gauntlet over pensions. We've seen a lot of strong rhetoric from the unions in the past few days and weeks, haven't we? How do you think they're going to handle this now and the growing divide? And also the fact that a lot of people are saying, well, actually, they don't have a mandate. Not enough people have actually voted for these strikes. Do you think they are going to lose support?
I mean, clearly, I think there's a lot of, controversy around this whole issue. And I think Kay's argument saying maybe you should tax the fat cats more. And I think...
No, I wasn't arguing for that. I was just saying that some people might think
I get your point. I do understand
problem.
the point. But, when you look at the impact that the government's having against bankers and the 50% tax, etc., one of the arguments that's against that is the people who create jobs, the people who build the economy, who run businesses, that fuel British growth. If you start taxing them at a level, then the country itself becomes unviable, unattractive. You stop.
Well, only if they decide to bail out on you. I mean, if they decide to stay and work with everybody, then we're fine.
I mean, the problem is, I think what you've got to remember is Britain's no longer the only choice. You have to, the country as a brand has to attract foreign investment, it has to attract people to come and invest and buy from our goods and services. If we start becoming unattractive, there are other places that people can go. There are other
increasingly less and less, if that's not a contradiction in terms. There's not a lot of places in the world that there's easy money to be made at the moment.
Well, I don't know. Taxation changes all over the world, and I think there are a number of places that you can go today where the taxation environment is far more relaxed, it's far more easier, and I think that the key people that you want to be attracting into the country look at our taxation and say at 50%, it's just too expensive. So, yes, I get, on one hand, you can tax the hell out of people because you need to balance your books and you need to support the man in the street. I respect that, I understand that. But then economically, you have to keep it balanced so you don't affect the people that you're relying on to create jobs in the first place.
I agree with you. It's all about balance, but is the balance right at this point? Has the coalition got the balance right? And, to use, again, another cliche, time will tell.
Yeah.
OK, let's have a look at another story on the front of The Guardian, and this is reveals Saudi's secret nuclear warning to NATO on Iran. Another front page story there, picture of Andy Murray looking extremely pleased with himself after, as it says, dispatching Feliciano, or should we call him Deliziano?
Where's the picture of Federer then?
Federer's a real story, isn't he?
That's the story today.
Much as I'm thrilled to see Andy Murray through, I have to say, and I'll be totally partisan. But what a shot for Federer to go out, because the hope was, wasn't it, it would be the Fab Four that would be left with Nadal, Murray, Djokovic and Federer, and for Federer to go to Tsonga.
I mean, the fact that he went first is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually watched the match. I was in meetings all day today, and I had the TV on. I was glued to it, because to go from 2 sets up, if somebody had said to me, what are the odds on him losing, I mean, you would never have taken the bet. And I thought the other guy was phenomenal, absolutely superb.
OK, let's have a look at the FT, because they have got a very despondent-looking Roger Federer on their front page. Brink of default there. They've got that vote, they've got it through. There were violent scenes on the streets of Athens today. The crowds have now dissipated. It looks like they've accepted what was inevitable. But is it going to make a difference, James, or are we going to see them eventually default?
I mean, clearly they got the vote through Parliament, but the question is, look at the response of the people. I mean, the people have not really supported it. They've come out in the streets, violent protests, etc. I think Greece is in a really, really difficult situation. I think on a macro level, the euro can't fail. If you notice recently, China stepping in and saying it will support the euro, it will buy euros. I mean, everybody has so much at stake. For Greece defaulting, I think it will almost be like a domino effect, because remember, we've had Portugal, we've had Ireland. There's been a huge amount of pressure across so many of these countries. So far, we've managed to protect it. I think Greece could be the catalyst that rocks this whole system.
I mean, we can't allow it to fail.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The consequences of Greece failing and the euro collapsing could be devastating.
But it's only over for now, isn't it? I mean, this money's only going to see them through for a very short time. So in a few months' time, assets are making other massive savings, then we could see a similar situation.
I mean, and that's really, let's be honest, this has been happening for the last few months. And, just as you think they've got it sorted, another disaster happens. And I think over the last 6 months, the whole of the Eurozone has been one issue after another. Will Greece see this through? I think, as you said earlier, only time will tell. The problem is that we've only got a short amount of time.
But what does an economy like the Greek economy need to get it going again? I mean, as you were saying, Samantha, this is a kind of stopgap measure if you put money in. What does it need to make it a viable entity
Because
again?
they have to start being, as you say, viable. They have to start being competitive. And in the euro, they can't, can they?
That's one of the difficulties when you're part of the Eurozone. And I think their strategy to sell state assets, to be honest, it's the quickest way you can realise capital, where you can actually get some liquidity into the system. The problem is, once you sell off your crown jewels, you've got nothing left. But right now, I don't think they have a choice.
And also they can raise taxes, but the Greek track record of paying taxes is quite
great.
interesting.
I think it's something like a quarter of the population
Is it?
don't pay taxes.
Right, that's good.
They just think that's acceptable. Let's move back to, take a look at the Daily Telegraph, which is just in their front page. And Pippa Middleton, it's not many days we bottom, this obviously the headline story there, 500,000 pension pot on striking teachers. But let's take a closer look at the story at the bottom. And this headline here, stub that out, you're in Stony Stratford. A town is attempting to become the first in Britain to ban smoking on its streets. Is that a good idea, Caan?
I mean, I'm not a rabid anti-smoker. I'm not a smoker. I think we do need to stub it out in that sense. I think you've got to take people with you, and I think people, the sort of rump of smokers feel very, very under the cosh, and I think more measures like this can turn people against it, and they get very kind of set their face against it. Is this because of litter, or is it?
It's saying it costs millions to clear street rubbish, so I guess the implication is it will save money, so people don't.
But I
smoke
think,
on the
for the
streets.
smoker, I mean, isn't this just one step too far? Yes, I get smoking in public places, offices, restaurants, pubs, etc., private places, but to be smoking in the street, I do think that you are absolutely prejudiced against the people who want to smoke. At the end of the day, there has to be a little bit of
But if
freedom.
it's a littering issue, if what they have is a littering issue, then you fine litter louts, don't you? I mean, you just, but they're obviously concentrating on the smokers, so they're going to feel really, really picked upon now.
I wonder if anecdotally they've found out that by banning smoking in bars and restaurants, if less people are smoking, because certainly when I smell smoke anyway, I'm not a smoker, but I don't know about you, if you actually see anyone smoking, it actually is almost, I don't know, it's so unusual, it makes you stop and think. And so what's that smell? Whereas before, if you go into a bar and restaurant, you would always come out stinking.
Well, I did hear a counter-argument, interestingly, in terms of children being exposed to people smoking. And some people say they're even more exposed than they used to, because when they're walking along the street and they're out with their mum shopping and mum and dad shopping or whatever, there are clumps on every corner who are smoking. So actually, to keep children away from it has perhaps not been effective in doing that.
Because you do notice it, don't you?
Yeah, you
and
really
wherever
do.
you go, in doorways, hallways, outside streets, because they've got no choice. But if you take that away, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how much of a backlash will you get against that?
OK, let's have a look at another story on the front of the Telegraph. The Queen joins austerity Britain with cut to funds. The royal family are to have its budget curbed under plans to be set out in Parliament today. This says in agreement with the Queen, the government will publish legislation to replace the civil list with a sovereign support grant that will reduce the royal household's income. I can imagine that will be really popular with people who, many argue, why should we be supporting the royal family when they actually have enough of their own income,
Well,
don't they?
Prince Charles had some figures out this week that he didn't appear, the headlines to come out of it. I love this phrase, a sovereign support grant. It does look like something she's got to go down and sign on and get down in some scuzzy wee office somewhere. I doubt it, right, Anna?
OK, I think we are just about out of time, but we'll see what that story has in store for us. Let's take a look at the front pages again. We'll start